Well, welcome back to the mid-Norfolk cottage garden, and this video is going to talk to you about propagating and reproducing Sisyrinchiums. I'm going to put a link into the video we shot earlier in May this year showing you what Sisyrinchiums are like in flower. They're a relatively short-lived perennial that after a few years does tend to start getting a little scrappy, and in front of you here is a mature clump of the plant that's been growing in this position for a couple of years, and you'll see a lot of dieback in the centre, a lot of blackened leaf and stems, and the flowering stems from last year. You'll see now where we've not deadheaded these, the flowers have set some good quality seed. Now this will naturally spread around the base of the plant. We'll show you some young plants in a minute. That's one way of propagating if they've already dispersed their seed and set. But by now, in late September, these seeds are fully ripened and probably have been for 4 or 5 weeks, and they'll stay on the plant quite reliably. Great way of just getting a clump of the seedlings is to just pull your hand straight up. In this instance it's broken off the actual seed head, but there we have a lovely little collection of nice round dark firm brown or black seeds ready for sowing. There's no need to store or treat these. We're actually thinking in this area of putting Sisyrinchiums as a row right the way down this gravel path, and all I'm going to do to propagate them in this area is simply scatter the seeds on the surface relatively quickly. I'm doing this as I would really sow a row of spring onions, and if you think of the early growth being very similar in stature and size, and that'll give you an idea of spreading them out over quite a broad drift of seed and along here. And I've actually previously seeded all the way down here with Sisyrinchiums, because once you've got a plant established in your garden you will be producing good volumes of seed at this time of year. So seeding, putting them down directly where they're going to grow is one option. Don't expect them to germinate quickly. These can take anything between 5 weeks and 5 months to germinate, and these seeds may not be flowing through here before Christmas. Some will, but then they'll thicken up, and by next March we should have a good drift of Sisyrinchium young plants that will flower the following season in this area. Let's go and find some young plants that have already seeded off plants naturally, because now we're going to show you how and at what size to start lifting and moving young plants that are in the wrong place that you may want to move and create new clumps in the garden elsewhere. Well, I've just moved around the corner on the same bed, and you can see these mature Sisyrinchium plants that have been growing here, and just in front of them you'll see these younger plants, not growing in large clumps at the moment. And these are seedlings that have established in here over the course of this season, probably falling naturally from this flower stem that's coming out of that mature clump just at the back there. And these have just fallen down onto the soil surface, dug themselves in and propagated, and you'll see they tend to come up, and by the end of the first growing season these probably will have started growing quite early on this year to have reached this size. But these are already a little large to be lifting successfully and moving to new positions unless you get a really good root ball with them. The ideal size for moving these if they're in soil where you don't want them growing or bad soil would be this much smaller plant here. And I'm going to show you how to do that in just 1 minute, because we've got an area in the courtyard where we've got lots of these young seedlings just at the right stage for lifting and potting up. Well, here in the gravel courtyard just in front of the garden gate, in fact, there's a little area of self-seeded Sisyrinchium that's established itself here over the last 3 or 4 weeks. These have been germinating, and I think they've all blown through from a plant that's on the other side of this garden gate, which just shows you how these do tend to spread themselves around the garden. But there's no point us keeping them here, so these are going to have to be moved, and they're lovely little plants if they don't get dog trampled, that is. So we're going to show you how to lift these and pot them up, and my preferred option is to pop these into 3 or 4 inch square pots, And we'll probably, because we want to grow these as clumps, put 3 or 4 individual plants into each of these pots, grow them on a little bit to get good root formation showing on the base of the pot, and then we'll pot them out in the final position. The other option is to move them directly and plant them. If you know and you've got the bed prepared where you want to increase your Sisyrinchiums, they can be planted out directly. So just work the soil away from the side of one of these. This is going to be hardcore down here, compacted gravel, and the challenge is to get a good root ball up with these so that you're not disturbing the roots too much. Try to keep as much soil around the base of that plant as possible. Don't try and knock it too far back. And you see the roots associated with these are quite large, thick roots, easily damaged, and it's easy to knock these plants back. So you want to try and preserve as much of that root as you possibly can and do as little disruption to the actual part of the plant under the surface, just in some general purpose potting compost here, which should form a really good medium for these plants to grow away quite quickly. So again, I'm getting under this one, lifting it up, getting my fingers under, and just look at the length of those roots coming off already. That's why these are a little tricky. If you leave them too late to try and move them, the degree of root damage you do to them, they tend to rot off and they don't do too well. So you want to try and get them at quite an early young stage. This size is ideal, where it's about 4 or 5 inches long. Now, that wasn't ideal because I've disturbed all the soil from around those thick roots, so chances of that one doing well significantly reduced because of the way I lifted it. You really do want to try and get them out of the ground with a clump of soil. Let's try and see if I can do better with this one. It's quite hard here because the ground is really quite poor. This is a gravel path, but if you can get under them, lift that soil, and don't worry too much about the other seedlings that are around the top. You can always weed those out later once the Sisyrinchiums are growing away, or top dress around them again to suppress the weed. There we go, that was a much more successful one. This one's come up nicely. Plenty of root. Trying to do this one-handed, which is always a little tricky. I think I've got a baby hollyhocks in there as well, which will probably mug these if I don't weed that out. I'm going to try and get a third one in there. So nice and deep with the trowel. Lift up. There we go, that's far better. Nice clump of soil come away with that, which will give it a really good start. Now I'm going to continue doing these until I've got 5 or 6 pots of these. 3 in a pot's probably a good number to grow on. Give them a good water. You want to try and keep them in growth, so put them somewhere warm and sunny, but keep the compost on the wet side for the first week and a half until you can see that these are starting to grow away. And at that stage I would grow them in these pots over winter. Depending on how mild it is, wait till you're starting to see some fresh growth on them in the spring, and then plant them out in their final flowering positions. And these should flower the following season and then last in that position for 3 or 4 years before they lose their vigour. Well, the last piece I'm going to show you is our mature big drift of Sisyrinchiums growing through this gravel base of our car park. This acts as a fantastic seed store for us. Just look at the amount of flower heads on here. You'll see we've not been deadheading these at all. And I wouldn't suggest you need to, because by leaving them to seed, you're really allowing them to propagate themselves year after year. The other way of moving these or propagating them is to lift these crowns. And this is an ideal time of year to do them, and treat them just as you would irises. Now, they haven't got rhizomes on them. They've just got those fleshy roots that we showed you with the smaller little seedlings. But on the tops you treat very much as iris, cutting them back into a V-shaped wedge, reducing the foliage and removing any of the flowering stalks and dead and dying leaves, and replanting them really well in good quality soil and keeping the roots moist. You want to try and get as much soil up as you possibly can when lifting these crowns if you are going to move them. They do divide quite well. Individual plants will pull apart, so they can be multiplied in that way as well, much the way you would dig any herbaceous plant's crown up. Let me just show you the little seedlings that are coming up around here, because this really is a natural seed bed for these things. And here, just have a look down here, focus in. you'll see what the little seedlings look like when they just germinate. Here's a tiny little one coming through, flat leaves, and as they grow up, we've shown you the more mature little plants that are a few weeks or a month older than this, but this is what you're looking for when you've sown the seed and how it will come through. Really quite thick gravel. We've got a top dressing here of probably an inch, inch and a half in places, but they're germinating best where they're reaching the soil. But if you leave them for long enough, they'll work their way down, and then you'll be rewarded with young plants sprouting up all over the place. And move them around your garden, different drifts, find an area where these do really well. We find this parched baked area in front of the raised old greenhouse bed at the front of the courtyard one of the best places to grow them. And by having such a deep drift of these, you get a beautiful long view, and the impact when you've got a big area planted like this, which is what we're going to try and create on that driveway going down through the old vegetable garden, is spectacular in May and early June. So do have a go trying to grow Sisyrinchiums, either from seed. If you've got friends that are growing them, now's the time to try and get some seed off them, or some young plants, or buy young plants yourself and grow them on over this season and let them seed the following autumn, and then you'll be away with Sisyrinchiums for the rest of your life, should you choose to grow them.